Malik stood in front of the towering glass door of Hargrave's gallery, adjusting the strap on his leather satchel. His palms were slightly damp, a mixture of anticipation and nervousness coursing through him. This wasn't just any gallery, it was one of the most exclusive in the city, frequented by the elite and frequented by those who were seen as the tastemakers in the art world. If he could get his work noticed here, it would be the breakthrough he needed. The thought of walking away from this encounter without success gnawed at him, but he wasn't about to let fear hold him back. He ran his fingers along the cool surface of the satchel, feeling the weight of the carefully wrapped canvas inside. The piece was a culmination of his deepest feelings, a blend of chaos, beauty, and raw emotion. A painting that would speak louder than any words ever could. He wasn't just an artist, he was a revolutionary in his own right, and this was his moment. Taking a deep breath, Malik pushed open the door. The gallery's air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and polished wood, an atmosphere of exclusivity that immediately made him feel like an outsider. Soft ambient lighting highlighted the pristine white walls, each adorned with works from artists whose names were known in every corner of the world. Paintings, sculptures, and installations seemed to exist in perfect harmony, each vying for attention in this cathedral of art. As Malik's eyes scanned the room, he couldn't help but feel both awe and frustration. The art world, he knew, was full of pretension. It was a world that placed labels on creators and deemed certain works worthy of admiration, while others, like his, were dismissed and undervalued. But Malik had long since learned that his worth wasn't determined by their shallow judgments. He had spent years honing his craft in isolation, away from the expectations of his family's name, away from the world's spotlight. He would enter this game on his own terms, or not at all. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Can I help you?" Malik turned to find a man in his late 40s approaching him. The man wore a tailored suit, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor with each step. He had the look of someone who had seen 1,000 artists come and go, a man whose indifference to the world was as much a part of his persona as his sharp suit. The man's eyes skimmed over Malik with a practiced detachment, his gaze lingering just long enough to make a quick judgment. "Are you here to see the current exhibition?" he asked, his tone bordering on dismissive. Malik nodded, but there was something about the way the man looked at him that irked him. He was used to it. In a world where appearances were everything, a young black artist dressed in casual attire, with a satchel instead of a briefcase, was an anomaly. But that was part of the point, wasn't it? He wasn't here to fit into their world, he was here to disrupt it. "No," Malik replied calmly, "I'm here to speak to the owner. I have a piece I'd like to show." The man's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "The owner?" He glanced around as if assessing whether Malik was truly in the right place. "Mr. Hargrave is a very busy man. He doesn't take meetings with just anyone. You're going to have to make an appointment." "I don't have an appointment," Malik said, meeting the man's eyes with quiet determination. "But I'm confident Mr. Hargrave will want to see this work." The man looked at Malik for a moment longer, then gave an exaggerated sigh. He motioned for Malik to follow him, his expression sour as if he were doing Malik a great favor. "I'll let him know you're here. Don't get your hopes up." Malik followed him through the gallery's sleek corridors, noting the way the man moved as though he owned every inch of the space. When they arrived at the office, the man knocked on the door before entering, leaving Malik standing in the hallway. A few moments later, the man reappeared and motioned for Malik to come inside. Mr. Hargrave was seated behind an elegant desk, the kind of desk that seemed to scream success. He was a tall, distinguished man in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a look of quiet authority. His sharp, calculating eyes were the first thing that caught Malik's attention, and for a brief moment, the artist felt the weight of their judgment. "Mr. Hargrave, this is," the assistant hesitated, clearly unsure of who Malik was. "This is a young artist with a piece he'd like to show you." Hargrave didn't stand to greet Malik, instead giving a brief nod and gesturing for him to take a seat. "I'm listening." Malik didn't miss the way Hargrave's eyes flicked to his clothing, nothing extravagant, just a simple black jacket and well-worn jeans, and how the gallery owner's lips tightened in disapproval. It was an all too familiar reaction. The art world, he knew, had a way of placing people into boxes, and Malik had never fit in their neatly defined categories. "I brought a painting," Malik said, setting his satchel on the desk and pulling out the carefully wrapped canvas. He could feel the weight of the moment, but he remained composed, knowing that this painting would speak for itself. "It's something I've worked on for months. It represents a different side of the world that I don't think is often represented in places like this." Hargrave raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Is that so? And you think this piece is worth my time?" The question hit Malik like a slap, but he held his ground. "I don't think it's about whether it's worth your time. It's about whether it's worth the time of people who can truly see its value." Hargrave smirked. "I'm sure it's nice. But art is a business, young man. I don't deal in value based on what someone thinks is important. I deal in what sells." Malik fought back the urge to smile. Hargrave was like so many others in the art world, focused on the superficial, concerned only with what was trendy, what was in. He had no idea what was about to hit him. "I'm not asking you to sell it right away," Malik said coolly. "I'm asking you to see it for what it is. Look past the surface." Hargrave motioned for him to proceed. With steady hands, Malik unwrapped the canvas and placed it carefully on the desk. As the fabric fell away, the gallery owner's eyes immediately fixed on the painting. It was abstract yet grounded in realism, a blend of chaos and harmony that depicted a world struggling to break free from its confines. The vibrant reds, the deep blues, and the stark whites created a sense of movement, of energy, of defiance. Hargrave didn't immediately speak. He stared at it, his gaze narrowing as he tried to comprehend the piece. His fingers tapped on the edge of the desk, his expression impassive. "Well," Hargrave finally said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I see you have talent. But I don't think this is the kind of thing that would fit our clientele." Malik's heart sank, but he didn't let it show. This was only the beginning. He knew the art world well enough to understand that judgment like this was just the first step of the battle. Hargrave's ignorance would cost him, he would see soon enough. "I appreciate your time, Mr. Hargrave," Malik said, his voice calm but firm. "But I'm confident you'll change your mind. You'll see the value of this piece eventually. Maybe not today. But soon." As Malik turned to leave, Hargrave's voice stopped him. "You think the art world is about to change for you, don't you?" Hargrave's tone was almost mocking now. "Well, good luck with that." Malik paused, his back still to the gallery owner. He took a deep breath, savoring the moment before he turned around. "No," he said quietly, his voice cold and unwavering. "I think it's about to change for you." And with that, Malik walked out of the room, leaving the gallery owner to wonder just how much he had underestimated the artist standing before him. Malik stepped out of Hargrave's gallery, his mind swirling with a mixture of anger, satisfaction, and anticipation. He had expected the owner's reaction. Hargrave was a man who valued superficial trends over true artistry. But what gnawed at Malik wasn't the dismissal of his work, it was the knowledge that Hargrave, like so many others, had no idea who he truly was. As he walked through the crowded streets, the sounds of the city faded into a dull hum. Malik had spent years in the shadows, not because he lacked talent, but because he had chosen to. The world didn't need to know his name, not yet. He wasn't ready to reveal everything. For now, he was content with being underestimated. The gallery owner had made one crucial mistake. He had assumed Malik was just another aspiring artist, another faceless creator trying to break into a world that had no place for him. What Hargrave didn't know was that Malik wasn't just any artist. His family's legacy was woven into the very fabric of the art world. His name, though unknown to most, was tied to some of the most expensive and influential artworks ever created. But Malik had chosen to keep his lineage a secret. He had chosen to live a life outside the expectations placed upon him. Malik walked into a small, quiet cafe, a place he often visited to clear his mind. He ordered a coffee and took a seat near the window, where he could watch the world move by without being seen. As he sipped his drink, his mind drifted to the past. Growing up in a prestigious family of artists, Malik had always known that he was destined for greatness. His father was a renowned sculptor, his mother a celebrated painter. Their works were displayed in galleries across the world, their names whispered in awe among the elite circles of the art community. But Malik had never felt comfortable in their world. It was a world built on image, reputation, and prestige, one that demanded conformity and subjugation to established norms. From a young age, Malik had rebelled against the idea of following in his parents' footsteps. He didn't want to be just another artist with a famous name. He wanted to carve out his own path, to create art that spoke for itself, without the weight of legacy holding him back. At first, he had tried to escape the family's shadow by pursuing a completely different career. But art was in his blood. Every time he picked up a brush or stood before a blank canvas, the world opened up to him. The colors, the strokes, the shapes, they all came together in ways that left him breathless. He had the gift, but he had no desire to play the game the way his parents did. So, Malik retreated. He kept his true identity hidden, adopting a different name and presenting himself as just another struggling artist trying to make a name for himself. He spent years honing his craft in private, away from the public eye. He sold small pieces to local buyers, never revealing his true potential. He needed to prove something to himself, to create without the burden of expectations. And in doing so, he found a freedom he had never known before. But now, the time had come to stop hiding. Malik had always known that the art world was broken, that it was filled with gatekeepers like Hargrave who valued the wrong things. He had spent enough time on the outside to understand the power dynamics at play, the way certain names were elevated while others were ignored, the way trends and politics dictated what was deemed valuable. Malik didn't care for any of it. He didn't want to be just another cog in the machine. He wanted to upend the system, to challenge the very notion of what was considered art. He had already begun to prepare. For the last few months, Malik had been working on his most ambitious piece yet, a painting that would push the boundaries of contemporary art. It wasn't just a work of art, it was a statement. A declaration that he would no longer be silenced or overlooked. He would show the world who he truly was, and they would have no choice but to recognize his genius. The piece, however, was more than just a work of rebellion. It was a personal reflection, a fusion of his experiences, his struggles, and his observations of the world around him. It was raw, unfiltered, and unapologetically honest. Malik poured everything into it, his anger, his pain, his longing for freedom, and his determination to break free from the constraints of his identity. But he couldn't reveal everything just yet. No, there was more to the story than just the painting. His true identity, the one that linked him to some of the most famous and revered artists in history, had to remain hidden for now. He wasn't ready to reveal the full extent of his power. He had to wait for the right moment. As Malik sat in the cafe, lost in thought, he felt the familiar weight of the decision pressing down on him. He could reveal himself to the world now, claim his rightful place in the art world, but that would mean surrendering the control he had over his own narrative. The world would see him as just another heir to a legacy. But if he waited, if he continued to work in the shadows, letting his art speak for itself, he could break free from the expectations and judgments that came with his family's name. He could create something entirely new, something that no one could define or limit. Malik smiled to himself, the decision clear in his mind. He would continue to play the game, but on his own terms. He wasn't ready to let the world in just yet, but he was getting closer. The time would come when his name would be on everyone's lips, when the art world would no longer be able to ignore him. For now, though, he would keep his identity hidden, just as he had done for so many years. But as he looked out the window at the bustling city, Malik knew one thing for sure: Hargrave wouldn't be the last to underestimate him. And when the time came, the art world would be forced to confront the truth, that the artist they had dismissed was more than just another aspiring painter. Malik wasn't a man who would fade into the background. He was a force waiting to be unleashed. The storm was coming, and the world wasn't ready. The weeks following Malik's encounter at Hargrave's gallery felt like an eternity. Though the gallery owner had dismissed his work, Malik knew it was only a matter of time before the world would have to acknowledge him. His thoughts were consumed by his art, his identity, and the rebellion he was planning, not just for himself, but for the entire art world. Every brushstroke, every color he mixed, felt like a small act of revolution. Malik's small studio apartment had become his sanctuary. It was cramped and filled with the smell of oil paints, but to him, it was perfect. The space was isolated, far from the prying eyes of the art world, and yet it was brimming with creativity. His work had always thrived here, in the quiet of his solitude, where he could pour his soul into each piece without concern for how it would be perceived. But now, things were different. He was no longer simply creating to express himself, he was creating to make a statement, to reshape the very foundations of the art world. The painting he had been working on for the past few months was unlike anything he had ever done before. It was chaotic, intense, and raw. Every inch of the canvas was covered with frenetic strokes of deep red, black, and electric blue, representing the turmoil and energy he felt inside. The piece was an explosion of emotion, a reflection of the struggles he had faced in his life as both a black man and an artist in an unforgiving world. But it was more than just a personal story, it was a call to action, an invitation to others who felt silenced to rise up and demand to be seen. Malik worked late into the night, the flickering light of a single desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. His fingers were covered in paint, his eyes bloodshot from hours of concentration, but he was driven by a singular purpose. The art world needed to see his work. They needed to understand that he was not just another artist trying to make a name for himself. He was a force, an unstoppable wave of creativity and power. Every now and then, Malik would step back from the canvas to admire his progress. He could feel the tension in the piece, the sense that it was on the brink of something monumental. It was unlike anything else on the market, not because it was trendy or fashionable, but because it was honest. It was fearless. It was unafraid to show the world exactly who Malik was, and it was ready to challenge every preconceived notion about art, identity, and value. But as powerful as the painting was, it wasn't the only part of Malik's plan. He knew that the time had come to reveal himself, not just as an artist, but as the person he truly was. The world had underestimated him for too long, and he was ready to show them exactly what he was capable of. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from his closest friend, Jamal, a fellow artist who had been one of the few to know about Malik's true identity. Jamal had always been supportive, though he was unaware of the full extent of Malik's family legacy. The two of them had grown close over the years, sharing their frustrations and dreams about breaking into the art world. Jamal, yo, I heard Hargrave's looking for new artists for his upcoming exhibit. Are you gonna submit something? Malik smirked to himself. He had known that Hargrave would eventually come around, but he wasn't about to play by the gallery owner's rules. Instead, he would make his own entrance. He replied quickly. Malik, no. I'm gonna make him come to me. He set the phone down and turned his attention back to the canvas. This piece, this masterpiece, would be his ticket. He had made a promise to himself that once it was finished, he would present it to the world in a way that no one could ignore. It would be impossible for Hargrave or anyone else to overlook it. The next few days were a blur of intense work and quiet reflection. Malik found himself consumed by the painting, unable to focus on anything else. He would barely sleep, surviving on quick naps and the occasional cup of coffee. His mind was a whirlwind of ideas, and his fingers seemed to move on their own, guided by a force greater than himself. With each brushstroke, the painting began to take shape, bold, violent, yet strangely beautiful. But there was more to this transformation than just the act of creating. Malik had been laying the groundwork for his entrance into the art world for months, taking steps that would lead to his moment of revelation. He had spent time studying the trends, understanding what galleries and collectors were looking for, and then subverting those expectations. His art wasn't about fitting into the established mold, it was about breaking it entirely. Malik had learned from his past. He knew that the art world was a game, and he was no longer content to play by their rules. He would make the rules. He would challenge the industry that had dismissed him, and in doing so, he would carve out his own place in it. His name would be on the tip of everyone's tongue, not because he had been born into wealth and privilege, but because his art was undeniable. His voice would be heard, even if he had to scream over the noise of the establishment to make it so. But as confident as Malik was, he also knew the risks. He had to be careful, calculated. The art world was unforgiving, and one wrong move could set him back years. That was why he had spent so long working in the shadows, honing his craft without revealing his true identity. His family's name, his true legacy, could either propel him to the top or drag him down. He had to control when and how he revealed it. Timing was everything. The gallery opening was only days away. The anticipation in the air was thick, electric with the unspoken tension of what was to come. Malik had already sent his submission to the gallery under a false name, Lorenzo Pierce, a pseudonym he had chosen carefully. It was a name that sounded familiar enough to pass, but it carried no weight in the art world. It was perfect for what he needed. For now, no one knew that the artist behind this piece was Malik Gregory, the son of some of the most influential figures in the art community. And that, Malik thought, was the way it should stay. The night of the opening arrived, and Malik stood outside the gallery in a sleek, tailored suit, a look of calm confidence on his face. He was a man of few words, but his presence spoke volumes. The invitation had been simple, just another exhibit showcasing new talent, but Malik knew better. This was no ordinary show. He could feel the weight of history bearing down on him as he stepped into the gallery, his heart pounding with anticipation. Inside, the gallery was a lavish affair. The walls were adorned with polished, high-end art, pieces from various up-and-coming artists, many of whom had established themselves by riding on the coattails of more famous names. Hargrave was mingling with a group of buyers and critics, his face flushed with the excitement of the event. He was too busy trying to impress his guests to notice the subtle undercurrent of change that had swept over the gallery. Malik blended into the crowd, observing from the periphery as the elite of the art world moved through the space with all the pomp and self-assuredness that came with their reputation. He saw the looks of disdain exchanged between critics, the way the buyers glanced at each piece as though inspecting a rare commodity. To them, art was about status, not substance. The more expensive a piece, the more valuable it became, regardless of whether it had any true artistic merit. That was where Malik's true power lay, in his ability to create something that transcended the superficialities of wealth and fame. His work wasn't made for the rich and privileged, it was made for those who had been overlooked, those who had been silenced. It was made for the rebels, the outcasts, and the dreamers. At last, Malik caught sight of the painting, the piece that would change everything, framed in the center of the room, bathed in the glow of a spotlight. The abstract swirls of deep reds, purples, and blacks pulsed against the pale white canvas, an explosion of energy that was both violent and beautiful. It was a visual scream, the kind of art that didn't apologize, that didn't conform. It demanded attention, and Malik knew it would get it. As people began to gather around the piece, whispering amongst themselves, Malik's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment. Hargrave, ever the self-assured curator, walked over with a glass of champagne in hand. He was about to make his typical speech about the significance of the new artists in his gallery when he stopped short. His eyes widened as he gazed at the painting, and the confident smile on his face faltered for just a moment. Malik saw it, Hargrave's unease, his uncertainty, and he couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. Hargrave had no idea what he was looking at, no idea that this was the beginning of a new era. A critic approached the painting, an older man with a sharp, discerning gaze. He took a step closer, his brow furrowed, studying the bold strokes and the intense emotion conveyed by the colors. Malik could see the wheels turning in the critic's mind. The piece was unfamiliar to him, yet it stirred something deep within him. This is unlike anything I've seen in a long time, the critic muttered to himself, stepping back to survey the whole canvas. What do you mean? Another critic asked, intrigued. There's an honesty here. Uranus, the older man replied, his voice betraying a hint of awe. It's almost as if the artist is exposing his soul to the world. It's unsettling, but there's something beautiful about it. Hargrave, sensing the growing interest in the piece, stepped forward, eager to take control of the conversation. He adjusted his tie and put on his most charming smile. Ah, yes, Lorenzo Pierce. A promising new talent. One to watch, I assure you. The critics nodded politely, but their eyes remained fixed on the painting, their words growing more thoughtful, more intense. Malik watched, feeling the power of his creation begin to sink in. Hargrave was trying to sell it, trying to take credit for discovering the artist, but Malik knew the truth. This wasn't Hargrave's moment, it was his. The room began to buzz as more guests gathered around the painting, whispering amongst themselves. Malik saw the recognition in their eyes. They weren't just admiring the piece anymore, they were questioning it, wondering what it meant, what it said about the artist behind it. And that, Malik realized, was the key. This was art that invited conversation. It wasn't about presenting an easy narrative or pleasing the masses. It was about challenging them to think, to question, to look deeper. As Malik made his way closer to the group gathered around the painting, he couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation. I've never seen anything like this before. It's so aggressive, yet beautiful. Who is Lorenzo Pierce? I need to know more about him. Did you hear? Hargrave claims he's got this piece exclusively. It's going to sell for a fortune. Malik's lips curled into a faint smile. He had done it. The art world was beginning to take notice. Hargrave might have thought he was in control of the show, but the truth was that Malik was the one pulling the strings. His painting was of force, and no one could deny it. A young woman approached Malik, her eyes locked on his with curiosity. She had seen him around the gallery before, but tonight there was something different about him. Perhaps she could sense the quiet confidence in his demeanor, the sense that he was more than he appeared. Excuse me, she said, her voice tinged with awe. Are you Lorenzo Pierce? Malik hesitated for a moment, then nodded. That's me. I have to say, your work, it's extraordinary. It's unlike anything I've seen in ages. Malik raised an eyebrow. Thank you. But it's just the beginning. The woman smiled, sensing his quiet intensity. I can tell. There's something about your art, it's almost as if it's alive, like it has a story to tell. I think people are going to remember this. Malik's heart raced, but he kept his composure. She was right. They were just beginning to see the truth of his art, but soon they would know everything. The evening stretched on, with more and more guests gathering around the painting. Hargrave, now aware that something was stirring, tried to regain control of the conversation, but Malik could see the shift. The power had already shifted away from him. The gallery was buzzing with excitement, and Malik could feel the weight of the moment. This was it. This was the beginning of his revolution. The world would no longer overlook him. He wasn't just another artist trying to break into the scene. He was the artist who would redefine it. The crowd's murmurs faded into the background as Malik took one last look at the painting, knowing that the power of his identity, both the one he had chosen and the one he had kept hidden, was finally about to be unleashed. The world wasn't ready for what was coming, but Malik was ready to give it to them anyway. The morning after the gallery opening, the phone buzzed incessantly beside Malik's bed. The bright, harsh light of the day outside filtered through his studio window, illuminating the dust that had settled in the corners of the room. His eyes were bleary, his body aching from a night spent overthinking every word, every look, and every comment he had overheard the night before. He reached for the phone, squinting at the messages and notifications that lit up the screen. Gallery Hargrave, congratulations on a powerful piece. Our top buyers are interested. I will call to discuss. Art critic at Fiona Lux, Lorenzo Pierce's piece is divisive but groundbreaking. Art that challenges society is long overdue. Anonymous artist, Who is this Lorenzo Pierce, and why does his work feel like a punch to the gut? Malik smiled, his eyes drifting closed again as he basked in the quiet hum of success. It felt good to be noticed, to be recognized. But deep inside, a gnawing feeling started to creep in, a voice that told him this success came at a price. The backlash was inevitable. The art world was fickle, and no revolution came without resistance. As the hours passed, the voices of dissent started trickling in. The criticisms began to pour in from unexpected places. Emails, social media posts, and phone calls all began to flood Malik's inbox. Gallery owner, I don't understand it. It's ugly. Too raw. Where's the refinement? This doesn't belong in our collection. Anonymous commenter on artreview.com, this Lorenzo Pierce is a charlatan, an amateur. Art should evoke beauty, not chaos. This is an insult to true artistry. Malik's stomach churned with each new message, the once exhilarating feeling of being noticed starting to sour. He had expected some pushback, but the venom in these critiques cut deeper than he anticipated. They weren't just attacking his work, they were attacking his identity as an artist. The critics were questioning his place in the world, dismissing his art as an expression of rage rather than a legitimate reflection of the struggles that had shaped him. But Malik was no stranger to rejection. He had spent his life fighting for a place in a world that had never made room for him, and he wasn't about to back down now. If anything, the criticism fueled his determination. He had spent too many years hiding his true self, too many years in the shadows, playing by the rules of a system that was built to exclude him. This was his moment, not just as an artist, but as a person. His art was the reflection of his truth, the truth that the world had tried to bury beneath layers of tradition and conformity. The backlash only proved that his work was cutting through the noise, shaking the foundations of what was considered acceptable. The real test, Malik realized, was not how the critics would respond. It was how the world would respond. He wasn't just making art for the galleries or for the buyers. He was making art for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, for every person who had ever been silenced by the system. But the backlash wasn't just professional. It was personal. Jamal, Malik's closest friend and confidant, had been following the public conversation surrounding Malik's work with a mixture of concern and awe. He had always known Malik to be bold, but he had never seen him push so hard, so recklessly, into the fire. Malik received a call from Jamal early in the afternoon. Man, are you seeing this? Jamal's voice was strained, full of concern. I'm seeing it, Malik replied coolly. But it doesn't matter. It's just noise. I get it, but this is different. They're going after you, Malik. They're not just saying your art's bad. They're questioning your whole existence as an artist. I know, Malik said, his voice low. But that's exactly why I did this. You're not going to let them destroy you, are you? Jamal asked, the worry in his voice clear. I'm not going to let them destroy me, Malik replied firmly. I'm going to let them see who I really am. All of me. Malik knew that what he had unleashed was bigger than just one painting or one gallery opening. This was about identity, power, and transformation. His art was a statement, and the pushback was only proof that it had hit a nerve. The more he thought about it, the clearer his path became. He wasn't going to hide anymore. He wasn't going to continue pretending to be someone the art world wanted him to be. He was going to let them see the truth, the raw, unfiltered truth, and whether they liked it or not, they would have to reckon with it. That evening, Malik posted an open letter on his social media accounts, a direct message to the critics, to the galleries, and to the art world in general. He wasn't just defending his work, he was confronting the entire system that had failed artists like him for so long. This is not just art. This is my soul. This is the raw, unfiltered truth of a world that refuses to acknowledge the beauty in chaos, in struggle, in pain. You can call it ugly. You can call it unrefined. But you cannot ignore it. You cannot erase the power of truth. And you will not silence me. Not anymore. Lorenzo Pierce. He didn't expect much. In fact, he expected even more backlash. But as the comments started flooding in, something unexpected happened. The very people who had once been silent began to speak up. They weren't just defending his work, they were sharing their own stories, their own struggles. The voices of the overlooked, the oppressed, the misunderstood, all began to resonate with Malik's message. I've always been told my work was too bold. Too loud. Too much, one comment read. But I see myself in this. I see us. Another comment came in, this piece speaks to the world we live in right now. I see myself in the anger, the pain, the resilience. Malik's heart swelled as he read each comment, each message of support. These weren't just art collectors or critics. These were people like him, people who had been sidelined by society, their voices ignored by the powers that be. They were finally being heard. The backlash wasn't the end of Malik's journey, it was the beginning. The art world was shifting, and it was no longer going to be a place for the elite few to dictate what was beautiful or valuable. Malik was a catalyst, and he had no intention of slowing down. By the end of the night, the post had gone viral. News outlets began to pick up the story. Malik's name was everywhere. The art world had been forced to pay attention, whether it liked it or not. And Malik? He was just getting started. The days following Malik's public declaration were a blur. News outlets, critics, and influencers across the globe began to weigh in on his statement. Malik's name became synonymous with both controversy and genius, polarizing the art world in a way no one had anticipated. But in the sea of criticisms and praise, one thing was undeniable: Malik Gregory had made his mark. The tides had shifted, and he was now the eye of the storm. The art world, once so firmly controlled by a few influential figures, was beginning to crack. Conversations that had been quiet whispers in underground circles were now front and center, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about representation, power, and the value of art. Malik's work had not only challenged traditional aesthetics, but had revealed an underlying current of discontent. Artists who were once marginalized now had a voice, a platform to share their stories, their pain, and their passion. For Malik, it wasn't enough to simply ride the wave of attention. He knew this was only the beginning. He had to keep pushing, keep creating, and most importantly, keep questioning the system that had sought to suppress him and his kind. By the time his next show came around, Malik's profile had skyrocketed. The gallery had already sold several of his pieces to high-profile collectors, and the public's interest had turned into a frenzy. But Malik wasn't interested in selling out or compromising. He wasn't just looking to make money or become the next art world darling. His work was a movement, and movements didn't fade quietly into the background. They demanded action. The next exhibit was scheduled to be even bigger than the last. The show was going to feature a new collection of pieces, all stemming from the same unflinching honesty that had made his debut so explosive. He had spent sleepless nights working on them, each canvas reflecting different aspects of his journey, his anger, his joy, his fears, his hopes. But this time, the stakes were higher. This time, he wanted to push the boundaries even further. Malik stood in his studio, a cup of lukewarm coffee in hand, gazing at the new collection that filled the space. The walls were adorned with jagged, chaotic strokes of color, vibrant against the backdrop of white canvas. The textures were raw and unfinished, as if the artist had been in such a rush to express his truth that there was no time to care about the final product. Every piece was a snapshot of a moment, an unfiltered glimpse into the mind of someone who had lived through both the best and the worst of what life had to offer. As he stood there, Malik could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. He knew that this next show would be the ultimate test. Would the art world continue to support him? Would they try to box him in, define him by the controversy he had stirred, or would they finally accept him for who he truly was? The gallery owners, Hargrave included, were already pushing for him to soften his approach, to make his work more palatable for a broader audience. They wanted to make it more marketable, to cater to the taste of the elite collectors who filled their coffers. But Malik had already made it clear that he was not in this for the money or the recognition. He wasn't playing by their rules, and he had no intention of doing so. If anything, he wanted to burn the rules down. But despite the pressure to conform, Malik remained resolute. He was no longer the quiet, reserved artist who had hidden behind the scenes. He was now a force, an undeniable presence in the art world. The more they tried to box him in, the more he broke free. The opening night of the second exhibit arrived, and Malik knew this was his moment. He stood in front of his new pieces, his heart pounding as he watched the first guests arrive. The room was filled with the usual high society figures, gallery owners, art collectors, critics, and buyers, but there was something different in the air this time. The murmurs were louder, the curiosity more intense. No one knew what to expect from Malik anymore. As the crowd gathered around the pieces, there was an air of tension. Some people stood in silence, arms crossed, while others leaned in closer to inspect the details. Malik had already anticipated the mixed reactions. Some people would love it, others would hate it, but there was one thing he knew for certain: they wouldn't be able to ignore it. A prominent art critic, Fiona Lux, who had written favorably about Malik's debut, approached him as he stood near his work. She was a sharp, imposing figure in the art world, and Malik knew she had the power to shape the narrative of his career. "Lorenzo," she said, her voice measured but warm. "I must admit, I didn't expect this." Malik looked at her, his eyes unwavering. "What do you mean?" "This collection," Fiona paused, choosing her words carefully. "It's much bolder than your first. You've really gone to new extremes." Malik nodded. "I don't believe in playing it safe anymore. This is who I am. Unfiltered, unafraid, and unapologetic." Fiona regarded him for a long moment, her gaze intense. "You're going to make waves with this, you know." Malik smiled, the weight of the past few months lifting off his shoulders. "I've already made them." The night unfolded with a mix of praise and critique, but it was clear that Malik's reputation was solidifying. The room buzzed with excitement, and many of the critics and buyers who had once been dismissive of his work were now in awe of his audacity, his willingness to challenge the status quo. Malik's art wasn't just a commentary on the world, it was a reflection of his own journey and the journey of every artist who had ever been told they didn't belong. As the night wore on, the crowd began to thin, but Malik remained, standing in front of his work, silently observing the reactions. He could hear the whispered conversations behind him, the intrigue, the debate, the admiration, and he knew that his revolution had only just begun. This was the power of truth. When an artist finally embraced who they were, without fear or hesitation, the world had no choice but to listen. Malik Gregory was no longer just an artist, he was a voice for a generation, a symbol of the unyielding struggle for authenticity in a world that demanded conformity. As the last of the guests filtered out, Hargrave approached him with a rare look of respect in his eyes. "You've done it again, Malik," he said, his tone acknowledging the undeniable power of the work. "But I'm going to need you to slow down. We're getting a lot of requests for moderation." Malik turned to face him, the fire in his eyes unwavering. "I'm not here to moderate, Hargrave. I'm here to change the game." Malik stood at the balcony of his high-rise apartment, staring out at the city below. The lights flickered against the darkened skyline, each one a small reminder of the world he was now a part of, a world that had, for so long, seemed so far beyond his reach. But now, he was right at the heart of it. The art world had come to him, not as an outsider, but as a leader of a new movement. And Malik wasn't just a participant anymore, he was the one setting the course. It had been nearly a year since the opening that had changed everything. His works were now in the permanent collections of several prestigious galleries, and he had become a household name among art lovers and collectors. Malik had been on every major art platform, featured in interviews, documentaries, and even spoken about by cultural commentators as the artist who had reshaped the landscape. Yet, despite the fame, Malik knew this was just the beginning. The pressure to continue pushing the boundaries of his art was suffocating. Every new piece had to surpass the last, every statement more audacious than before. but Malik felt something in him shift. He had spent so long creating for others, for galleries, critics, and buyers. What if, now that he had everything he'd ever wanted, he could finally create for himself? What if he could redefine his relationship with art, not as a commodity to be consumed, but as a legacy to be passed down? His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp buzz of his phone. He glanced down to see a message from Hargrave. "I need to speak with you. Urgent. Come to the gallery tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Malik's mind raced. Hargrave had been his biggest supporter, but also his most formidable challenger. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, but Hargrave's insistence on pushing him toward more sellable work had never sat right with Malik. He had taken a few steps back from the public eye recently, and Malik wondered what this sudden meeting could mean. Was Hargrave asking for more compromises? The next morning, Malik made his way to Hargrave's gallery, the same one that had first exhibited his work and launched him into the limelight. The walls still bore his pieces, each one now commanding prices far beyond what they had once been valued at. Yet as Malik entered, a sense of unease settled over him. Something felt different. Hargrave was waiting for him in his office, pacing back and forth. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by something else, an air of urgency, even tension. "Malik," Hargrave said, gesturing for him to sit. "It's good to see you. But I need to be honest with you." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Honest about what?" "The world is changing. The art world is changing, and it's no longer enough to just make bold statements. I understand what you've been trying to do, but it's becoming clear that the market can't sustain this kind of work forever. You've alienated some of our most important collectors, Malik. Some of them are starting to pull out. You've got to temper your approach." Malik's heart skipped. "So, you want me to sell out?" Hargrave looked taken aback by the sharpness in Malik's voice. No, that's not what I mean. But we need to rethink the direction. People are tired of chaos. They're looking for something more refined. Something more palatable." Malik stood up abruptly, his hands clenched at his sides. "You're telling me to tone it down? To water down my work? The whole reason I've done what I've done is to show them the raw truth. You don't just get to silence me now because it's inconvenient." Hargrave paused, his gaze hardening. "I'm not trying to silence you, Malik. I'm trying to help you. Your future is at stake here." "My future?" Malik scoffed. "You're worried about your future, Hargrave. Not mine." There was a long silence between them, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Malik's mind raced. He could feel the suffocating pressure of the world around him, pulling him in two directions. One was the path of compromise, the one Hargrave suggested, the easy path, the one where he could continue to sell and profit, where his work would be accepted. The other was the path of truth, the one where he could stay true to himself and his vision, no matter the cost. "Do you remember when I first came to you?" Malik asked, his voice softening. "Do you remember what you said?" Hargrave's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. "You said you believed in me," Malik continued, his voice steady but unwavering. "You said my work was important. Not just because it would sell, but because it would make people think. It would make people uncomfortable. So what changed?" Hargrave's expression softened, but there was a touch of regret in his eyes. "The world changed. What used to be groundbreaking is now seen as unnecessary. People don't want to be challenged anymore, Malik. They want comfort." Malik clenched his fists. "I'm not here to comfort anyone. I'm here to wake them up." Hargrave sighed, sitting down behind his desk. "I don't want to lose you, Malik. I don't want to lose your work. But I don't know how much more the world can take of this." Malik stared at him for a moment, then turned toward the door. "Maybe the world doesn't deserve my art then." He stepped out of the office, feeling both liberated and trapped. Hargrave's words had struck a nerve, but they had also sparked something deeper inside Malik, a resolve that he hadn't felt in months. Outside, the world was still moving, still turning, and Malik knew that he was part of something far bigger than a gallery show or a critic's opinion. He was creating a movement, a legacy that would live on beyond the confines of the art world. He had already done the hard work, he had already shattered expectations. What came next didn't matter as much as staying true to the message he had started. That evening, Malik sat down at his canvas again, the familiar feeling of paint on his hands, grounding him. He wasn't creating for anyone else anymore, not for Hargrave, not for critics, not for buyers. He was creating for himself. And as he worked, he realized that his true legacy wouldn't be in the sales of his pieces or in the galleries that showcased them. It would be in the impact of his art, the way it made people think, feel, and see the world differently. The world wasn't ready for Malik Gregory, but Malik wasn't going to wait for permission. He would leave his mark in the way that only he could, with raw, unapologetic truth.